why crypto is so interesting to you, given kind of your background, and like, is this just like the next evolution of that internet?
One of the really interesting things about the internet is that it was really hard to define in the early days. And I think it's actually pretty hard to define today, but we all know what it is. And so one of the first things that was a challenge for us as a venture fund in 2017 was to define the blockchain. And just a little bit of background, what you asked for, I started a fund with two other people in 2017 called Blockchain Ventures. Our mission is to invest early in ideally what will become the biggest outcomes of the blockchain. And the reason for that was really very simple, is every time there is a generational technology shift, new things are made possible and by that technology. And so new businesses, new categories of business are made possible for the first time, and that leads to a very fertile ground for investing. It means there's a lot of startups. It means that some of them will go on to become very big outcomes. And we've seen that. We saw that with the computer and personal computer technology wave. We saw it with the internet. We saw it with the adoption of mobile technology. And the blockchain at the time seemed to be on the same path. But it became very difficult to explain why it was that the blockchain would be so important and why it would create so many outsized outcomes. And so we started by just trying to define the internet. We saw some similarities between the two. I don't think at the time we saw how similar they were. But one of the things that we eventually got to with the internet, and I don't know if you want to take a stab at defining the internet, but if you want to try.
No, you do it. You're the expert.
I don't know that there is such a thing, but what we got to was really simple, was that the internet allowed any two entities to exchange data in a frictionless way.
Information superhighway, I think is the terminology
that's
they
right.
used to use.
But what that meant is that every company could be described as a entity exchanging data with another entity. So Facebook could be described as person entity one sending some pictures and text, i.e. data, to entity two, Facebook, and Facebook then sending that information to entity 3 through N, which are their friends. And Uber could be described the same way, entity 1 being a person, a passenger, sending the GPS coordinates and their credit card data to entity 2, Uber, who would then send it to entity 3, the driver, who would pick them up. And having that as context made it much easier to define the blockchain. The blockchain simply was changing one word. It's any entity exchanging value with any other entity or any other entities in a frictionless way. And so you could see how similar the two were. It also allowed us to say, okay, what worked for the blockchain, for the internet might work for the blockchain as well. And so that became the formation of the fund. We used the historic filters, and you and I have spent some time talking about this, but we tried to derive filters for what would have been good filters for the internet had we been investing early in the internet, so that we could use that as the beginning of a framework for investing in the blockchain.
And what are like the key pieces to that?
You know, they're not fundamentally different than what you hear a lot of investors talk about, which is, why now? And the answer is always because this company couldn't exist before now. So one of our filters is very simply, does this company fundamentally depend on the blockchain to exist? Second one is always about team. In the case of the biggest outcomes, one of the things that was really different about teams was that they were there way past the $1 billion acquisition offer. So teams tend to be mission driven in the biggest outcomes. They tend to have the ability to recruit extraordinary talent when they have a tailwind and some growth. And they tend to still have one participant still involved in running the company 10 years in when they're successful, which means that the founders are mission driven. They have the ability to recruit, and they have some skill that is a critical skill for some lever of value creation. And then the third main one is around the market. and they all invented, almost all of them invented new categories of business. So you don't really know how big those markets are, but the markets have to be at least potentially massive. They typically have monopoly or oligopoly outcomes, and they're typically defensible through network effects, technology, IP, or economies of scale. And one interesting thing when we went to backtest this was that most of them had growth in margins over the first 10 years.
So they become better businesses as they get scale.
That's right. They capture more of the value they create. And part of the reason for that is if you capture too much value too quickly, you open up the market to a lot of competition. So if you look at Amazon may be one of the first companies in history to consolidate a fragmented market. And I think one of the core reasons for it was that they priced so efficiently and didn't make money in the early days that no one wanted to be in that business. And so that allowed them to do other things really well, like service and delivery and convenience and one-click shopping and Prime and broad selection, all of which together made them the place you would want to go first. And so we look for those kinds of signals. I think you added another one on one of our conversations in a taxi a few years ago, which is often called traction. But most companies at the stage we invest, which is seed and Series A, don't have traction. So we look for leading indicators of traction, which can often be small markets that a company is going after to get a monopoly in and grow concentrically from there, or some really 10x improvement in product, or there's a variety of things. But that we call it gravitational force internally, but that has become a fourth filter ever since our taxi ride. So thank you.
Hey, you, did you like this video? Great. We make 5 of them a day and post them here on this channel. Make sure you're subscribed, like the video, and see you next time.